Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. The United States drone warfare program continues to be in the spotlight. A German court has demanded the government to revisit its tacit permission for U.S. drone strikes launched from its territory. At the same time, Amnesty International has called out the U.S.'s clandestine use of drones in Somalia in a scathing new report. The nature of this modern form of warfare, used mostly by the United States, is now being questioned. To discuss that a bit further, we're joined now, firstly, by Professor Christian Kaunert, who is a professor of international security. He's joining us now from Cardiff in Wales in the UK. We're also joined by Mr. Mushtaq Rahim, who is an expert in security affairs. He's joining us now from the Afghan capital, Kabul. And we're also finally joined by Mr. Shannon Sedgwick, who is a principal security consultant, and he is joining us now from Sydney in Australia. Thank you all for joining us. Shannon, I'd like to start with you, if I may. Actually, before going to you, Shannon, if you allow me, I wanted to, in fact, show our viewers a few of the statistics, if you allow me, from the Bureau of Investigative Journalism of drone strikes over these years and how many people have been killed. This is according to, of course, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism ever since it started recording. So we have firstly this image of the general numbers, the total numbers, I should say, pardon me. And then after this, we have a slide of the numbers coming out specifically for Afghanistan, and then Yemen, and then Somalia. And those will, of course, play for our viewers as we're talking, as I'm speaking right now. Shannon, I wanted to get your thoughts overall then about drone warfare. Is it effective?
Supporters of the drone program would say that it is far more effective because it produces the boots needed on the ground in terms of military forces. However, if you look at the amount of civilians that have been killed, you could argue that it is completely ineffective because the terrorists that are being killed by these drones, it's being replaced by more people who are angry about the drone strikes killing their family members and thus aiding the recruitment of more terrorists to their cause, to their radical cause. So it's a double-edged sword, to be sure. And there's not enough governance and oversight of the drone programs to effectively make a educated decision on whether they are effective or not. I guarantee that the statistics that you just had up on the screen are severely underreported, despite the best efforts of those journalists that did that study.
Indeed. Christian, I wanted to get your thoughts on that. One is the argument of how effective these drones are to begin with. And then B, then there's a question of international law, isn't there? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to hear the thoughts in terms of how effective it is, because it always depends on effective for whom, right? When you look at it from the perspective of America, it is effective in a way, but the effectiveness is in relation to how many American soldiers are killed in the conflict. And there, on the whole, we can say it is effective because not so many get killed in that particular conflict. Is it effective at killing terrorists? Well, we see that some of them are killed, but like the previous speaker was saying, a lot of innocent civilians also get killed. So there, we might argue that it is a little bit more murky how effective it really is. But then the question becomes, well, what are the realistic alternatives? America is not going to commit boots on the ground, certainly not with the current U.S. administration under Trump that has been talking about withdrawing from Syria and from a number of other places. They're not going to do that. So the realistic options available here are either continuing the program or finding some other way that doesn't involve boots on the ground. And I don't quite see what those alternatives are. When it comes to international law, well, again, this is a little bit of a complicated and difficult matter. Of course, you have the two paradigms. You have the jus in bello, so how you conduct your warfare, and the jus ad bellum. So in that sense, some people would already question whether, in a sense, the war in itself is maybe the wrong war to be fighting. So in that case, you could argue. And then, of course, how that war being conducted? So that is also a very complicated and difficult
All right,
question.
so let's go to Kabul now. Mushtaq, you've been listening to our guests there, but you're in Afghanistan itself, Mushtaq, and that's, of course, been a country that has been the target of many U.S. drone strikes over these years. Tell us about the effect of them in Afghanistan.
Well, as it was earlier said, it's a double-edged sword. So it has been this in Afghanistan as well, using the drones. But you know what? There are so many ungoverned areas, and looking at the terrain inside around the Duran line. Felt the federally administrated tribal areas are FATA, these agencies that are governed by Pakistani administration. There are areas which are mountainous, which cannot be easily penetrated, and it's difficult to have boots on the ground or have access of a human force to really tackle the menace of terrorism. Retrospectively, I can tell you, drones have created a bit of concern among the insurgent groups fighting around the Duran line and inside Afghanistan for a while. But as earlier said, it has also been cause of a lot of outrage among the general public, because most of the times you don't get the Americans have not been able to get all their shots at the target. And that's why there have been collateral damage throughout the Afghan conflict, creating grievances among the communities and making the locals distance from the international community as well as from Afghanistan, which ultimately has caused a sort of situation where there is a significant gap between public and the national governance, resulting in more space for the insurgents to occupy and operate from.
Indeed. And Shannon, that leads me very well into my question for you, because, collateral damage seems to be the key word here, doesn't it? This first case that I mentioned in my introduction coming out of Germany basically goes back to that, about two Yemenis, two family members, and their family bringing up this case against the United States and specifically now Germany as well for allowing an airbase within its territory to be used to launch these drone strikes, which then resulted in 2012, at least, in the killing of these two family members, innocent family members, that is. Can we, in this case, or in any case, Shannon, just excuse all of this as collateral damage and say, you know what, this is all part of the war on terror, and that should be then okay with all of us?
No, I don't think so. I think there needs to be a level of accountability and a level of governance applied to all military operations that have the potential to cause collateral damage and to kill innocent civilians. There needs to be oversight that the intelligence that is used to conduct that strike is in fact accurate and has been verified from a number of sources. Under the new Trump administration, he's given more of a free rein to the leaders of his different defense departments to conduct the strikes without having to go back and seek that high-level approval from the White House, which may result in faster decision-making on the ground, but that it's causing that hastiness to make mistakes and to not verify intelligence properly before conducting a strike. These are questions that we need to ask, and I think it's excellent that Germany is holding these legal proceedings and they are taking accountability for their part in US operations in drone strikes, because they're not the only allied force or the only Western country that is or any country that is performing drone strikes. We can't lay it all at the US feet. They're not the only ones using drones.
Indeed, and Christian, I imagine, the likes of the United States and even where you're sitting in the UK and others would argue, listen, we've suffered terrorist attacks and we need to do something against this menace. Does that in and of itself excuse collateral damage, do you think, considering, again, they would name this the war on terror, of course, right? So, I mean, in their eyes, this is a war. And then collateral damage is just, again, in their eyes, a natural outcome of that.
Well, For sure, we are in the war on terror, and this is something important to bear in mind. But nonetheless, I think, as in any war, there's rules as well, isn't there? And there's rules in terms of how that war is being conducted and collateral damage as such, and especially the idea of keeping civilian deaths to the absolute minimum is inherent in any kind of military thinking in terms of war, and has been guiding our international law in terms of how wars are being conducted. So this clearly, therefore, also needs to apply to this particular war. And as such, even the idea, even the terminology collateral damage, a lot of people might take offense already using those words. So because we are dealing with human lives here. So of course, it is something that we need to think very, very careful and keep to an absolute minimum, as in any war we should.
Exactly, and that human angle is a very important one, as you mentioned, and we're going to come back on that point, in fact, after this short break. I'd like all of our guests to stay with us, of course, and viewers stay with us as well. We're going to continue this conversation shortly. Viewers, thank you for staying with us here in Scope as we continue to discuss drone warfare in general, and of course the United States' use of it around the world. We're still joined by Christian, Mushtaq, and Shannon. Mushtaq, I wanted to bring you in on this segment. As Christian, they were saying before we went to break, Mushtaq, there is the human angle to all of this, and that's not spoken of enough, is it? Where we don't talk about the innocent lives and the innocent families that are affected by these drone strikes. Tell us how that factor plays in Afghanistan specifically. What have you seen vis-a-vis the effect of these drones on families, and again for the recruitment, be it for the Taliban or other terror groups?
Well, if we look at the history of the warfare, starting from the third generation warfare, we have been seeing increase in the human losses with the passage of time and change in tactics. The fourth generation warfare, where proxies were used, a lot of civil wars were affected using that tactic, and now the drone warfare. Of course, there is high number of casualties among the civilians, and that has been cause of real concern. As I told earlier, this has been creating a lot of grievances among the general communities and general public, and that results in creating a recruitment base for the terrorists and insurgents. But let's not forget that the other aspect of human loss that the terrorists and the insurgents in Afghanistan have been using, and that is propagating against the international forces and against the Afghan forces. What do I mean by that? Sometimes the precision in terms of targeting has been so specific. There have been precise attacks against them, but then the terrorists have been able to leverage on the sentiments and the past mistakes that have been committed by these drone attacks, showing the terrorist losses as the innocent lives losses or collateral damage. And because of that, they have been able to show each and almost every drone attack as if it was against the civilians, which is not the case. As I said earlier as well, we know that so many of the Al-Qaeda members in Waziristan and other parts of the federally administrated tribal areas around the Duran line have been mainly targeted using the drone attacks. And inside Afghanistan, the Tora Bora area in eastern Afghanistan has been very impenetrable. It's really difficult to really target the terrorists and insurgents. But these and there are not many civilians living in the area, so these drone attacks have been quite effective there as well. So yes, there is downside to it, but not as much as it is propagated by terrorists to avoid such attacks.
Interesting point there. Shannon, I wanted, of course, to get your thoughts on the human angle of this, but I also wanted to add this on, if I may, and that comes down to the sovereignty of any country around the world, right? I mean, we can talk about, for example, in Somalia. I mean, I imagine the United States would go into Somalia and still goes into Somalia through AFRICOM or other such organizations and simply carries out drone strikes at will, really, not always necessarily seeking permission from the country that it is attacking. What do you make of that then? That sort of creates a bit of a chaotic world, right, where borders don't mean what they once did.
Well, that's right. Technology has made the world a far smaller place. It's and particularly in terms of military technology, where they are able to sit under a bunker in the Nevada desert and pilot a drone on the other side of the world. And there are systems in place between governments where they would seek permission for usually an attack. But if it is a clandestine operation that they're conducting, say, run by the CIA, who are governed by a different set of laws, the US military operates under a Title 10 set of laws, which prohibits them from conducting clandestine operations to a degree. Even their Tier 1 special forces are restricted. But if they have a Title 50, which is a far wider set of laws and restrictions, less restricted rules of engagement in which to conduct these clandestine operations. So permission wouldn't always be asked because it's not necessary under their own governing laws. So that is something to consider.
And Christian, what are your thoughts on that then? Because then it makes it a free-for-all to an extent, doesn't it? Where if the U.S. and, some would argue is still very much, in its mind at least, living in a unipolar world where it is the sole superpower around the world, that sort of just gives the U.S. carte blanche to do as it wishes elsewhere, under the guise, of course, its argument would be that we're protecting Americans, we're doing this for national security. What of other countries' sovereignty then, Christian?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if we go back to some of the early battles in the war, first Afghanistan, then especially the war in Iraq, a lot of people were making the argument, look, if now you are not fully adhering to international law, in the future, there'll be other powers that are also going to do that. And what have we seen? We've seen Russia taking over Crimea. We've seen Russia being very strongly involved in eastern Ukraine and in Georgia and a number of other places. And it is, to an extent, true. If everybody keeps to the same rules, it is easier to really make sure that they're being kept. And if the world superpower is not always keeping the rules, then others might feel that they can do that too.
All right, so Mushtaq, I wanted to, for a moment, ask you, Mushtaq, about the effect of these drones and how they're operated, of course. And I imagine Afghans, or some of them at least, may understand how all of this is operated from a distance. But what kind of a political effect does this have on the ground within Afghanistan? What kind of pressure does this put on politicians who side with the U.S., in Afghanistan? I imagine that puts them in an awkward position, doesn't it?
It does. It has been a cause of concern for the national government. If you go back and look at the ex-president Karzai epoch in Afghanistan, during his second term, he was at loggerheads with the Americans, mainly because of these aerial bombings, which at times went wrong, but most of the times were propagated to be wrong, as I said earlier. And that created a sort of headache for President Karzai, who had to be responsible to the elders of the local communities, to the influential personalities from the rural areas. And as such, he was quite open, and he always criticized the Americans in media. The current president as well, as recently as last week, raised concerns about the aerial bombing, which in some of the cases have gone wrong. Let's not forget that in asymmetric warfare, particularly in Afghanistan, the Taliban have been using the local communities as their operating base, and as such, the local communities become the human shield. And anytime pursued by the forces, international and national, that has caused collateral damage, which again goes in favor of the insurgent groups. So all in all, it puts everybody in an awkward position. Even the American generals and NATO senior leadership has been at times at a very difficult situation where they had to defend their operations, but in the meantime, be accountable and transparent about what has happened on the battlefield. So yes, certainly it does create a lot of problems for people, but let's not forget that its effectiveness as well, where it has been a cause of pressure on the insurgents to retreat back and limit their operations.
Okay, we'll leave there as a final word, gentlemen, but of course we appreciate your times, your insight and analysis here in Scope. Let me thank our guest there from the end. There at the end was speaking Mr. Mushtaq Rahim. He is an expert in security affairs. He's an expert also on conflict and peace as well, and he was speaking to us from the Afghan capital, Kabul. We were also joined by Professor Christian Kaunert, who is a professor of international security and of policing. He's director also of the International Centre for Policing and Security at the University of South Wales. He was speaking to us from Cardiff. And we were also joined by Mr. Shannon Sedgwick, who is a principal security analyst, and he had been speaking to us via Skype from Sydney in Australia. Now, viewers, as our guest spoke about, we spoke about, of course, these cases coming out of Germany and Somalia, but we use that as an excuse to discuss the fact that drone warfare has caused collateral damage, or at least that's the term that's used, which seems very robotic considering those are humans at the other end who are killed, many times, of course, innocents. Then, of course, there's the issue of the sovereignty of those countries that are being attacked by the United States, because the U.S. does not, most of the time at least, seek permission to carry out such drone strikes in those countries. What does that then mean for any country's sovereignty around the world? And then, the fact that this warfare is conducted very much like a video game, sitting in the Nevada desert, as I believe Shannon had said. You can have a drone operator attack Yemen or some other country around the world. What does that say about the inhumanity of all of this? We'll keep a very close eye on how those specific cases in Somalia and Germany play out and what effect they may have, as well as the U.S.'s continued use of drone warfare going forward. We'll be back, though, after a short break with our next segment. Stay tuned. Thank you for staying with us here in Scope. Viewers, we're going to start now with a UN appeals chamber and its verdict. It's in fact increased the sentence of convicted former Bosnian Serb president Radovan Karadzic to life imprisonment. He's convicted of committing genocide of Bosniaks in the early to mid-90s and taking UN peacekeepers hostage, among other charges, all while terrorizing residents of Sarajevo. Now, what this means for the region's people now is unclear beyond the already well-defined divisions over this verdict and the history. For some, this is long-delayed justice. For others, though, it is a travesty of justice. To discuss all of this a bit further, we're joined now by Ms. Nidzara Ahmetasevic, who is a journalist from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and she's joining us now from Athens in Greece. And we're also joined by Ms. Jovana Prusina, who is a transitional Justice Program Coordinator within the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network. She's joining us now from Belgrade in Serbia. Jovana and Nidzara, thank you both for joining us here in Scope. Jovana, if I may, I'd like to start with you. How did you feel about this case? What do you make of this verdict of the appeals court?
First of all, thank you for having me. And second, I feel like this is a very important verdict, not only for the region, but for the international criminal law itself. Radovan Karadzic was among, when it comes to all those who were indicted before the ICTY, he was one of the highest ranking officials. Therefore, I feel like this verdict is very important. As I said, on one hand, when it comes to criminal justice, when it comes to international criminal law, that is still developing. But on the other hand, for the region and for the whole process that need to occur in this region, I feel like this verdict will be the base not only for establishing facts within our society, but for history books to be written in the future.
I imagine, Jovana, if I may put you on the spot for a moment, that where you're sitting in Serbia, that would not be the majority opinion. I imagine that many people see this, in fact, or they would support Radovan Karadzic.
Yes, but it's not the case only with Radovan Karadzic. It was the case with a lot of verdicts that were rendered before the ICTY or now so-called mechanism. So yes, there is no strong support, but on the other hand, we can see the difference between the reaction of political officials now and, for example, 10 years ago. Because now it's very interesting that you have right-wing political leaders, et cetera, that are very, they condemn this verdict and they feel like that is disgrace. But on the other hand, if I can say, the political establishment itself, so ruling party, people who are ruling within the government, are being silent. Their silence is very loud, but on the other hand, they're not condemning it in very flagrant way like they used to do before.
Nidzara, what are your thoughts on this case? The fact that now he's been imprisoned for life.
I'm waiting for Mladic to go in prison for life. Radovan Karadzic is not the only one. Unfortunately, there are many followers of Radovan Karadzic and Ratko Mladic ideology. They are still very alive. They do everything they can for already more than 25 years to deny what did happen in Bosnia during the war, not only in Bosnia, but also in Croatia, in Kosovo, and other parts where the war was going on during the war. And unfortunately, I can see followers of this ideology all over the region. And what is for me even more sad, that followers of his ideology could be seen and found all over the world, as in New Zealand now. And that's a sad story. If the international community, if especially European Union, stopped Karadzic and Mladic and others like him before, if they stopped him in 90s when the war was going on in Bosnia, today probably you will not have to face with something like we are facing with in New Zealand or some other parts of the world.
And that's a very good point that you brought up there, Nidzara. Jovana, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that the world did not appreciate the gravity of what occurred when it came to what occurred in former Yugoslavia, and that it did not act fast enough?
Absolutely. I mean, the war started and mass atrocity started way before, for example, Srebrenica genocide, but the genocide still happened. So the fact that something like that could happen, as we all say, in European soil after the Second World War, that's a, disgrace itself. So there is a big chunk of blame on international community, on international factors, but as someone who is living in Belgrade, and now this is me personally talking, I feel like here international community is being used as a sort of distraction to make them to blame, to be the one to blame, not us. So for someone who is living in the Serbian capital, I would put emphasis on dealing with the past within our own yard. And that's why I feel like this verdict is very important, regardless of the reactions that are now happening. But that verdict, together with other verdicts rendered before the ICTY, will bring us facts. And that is something that can be very, very important, not to say actually crucial in the future.
Okay, and Nidzara, the fact that we both alluded to this already, but the fact that it took this long for Karadzic and others before him and possibly now after him to be brought to any form of justice, that in and of itself should be concerning, isn't it? Because, many people would argue that, for example, the United States may have very well known where Karadzic was for all those years that he was on the run, in disguise of some sort. Why do you think it was that the West or whoever may have known where Karadzic was, why did they take so long before finally bringing him to justice?
It's very hard to answer that question. And that's one of the questions I'm asking myself for over 25 years. In a way, probably it is that they couldn't really understand what's happening in countries of former Yugoslavia. I have to say that international community don't understand even now what's happening in our countries, and they don't even put enough effort to understand, as well as they don't understand what is going on now in Pakistan, in Syria, in many other countries, in Afghanistan. The problem is that international community is represented by the people and politicians from the West, and that their world is, the vision is from their offices and from their big cities, rich perspective, and they do not really put enough effort to see how is the life for us who are living outside the EU borders and who are living a different life than people in Washington and people in Brussels and London and all these big centers. Like for the moment, everybody wants us to believe that the most important question in the world is Brexit. It's not. I'm sorry. Yeah. Today, so many people will die in Pakistan, in Syria, in Afghanistan, in many African countries. Why do I have to talk about your problems? And that's the problem. We are living in the world where we are not equal, and the problem is that those who are making decisions are not those who are the best informed all the time.
Very interesting point there, Nidzara. Jovana, what you make of that? Because, you know, that has been an argument for many issues, not just this one, but even in this context, Jovana, I wonder what you think. Do you think it's just that this entire issue, what happened here in former Yugoslavia, just wasn't, you know, attractive enough for the news media, for example, global news media, I should say, or for governments around the world, that they just wanted to wash their hands of it and not really give it that much attention? Is that, do you think, one of the things that may have created this major delay in justice?
Well, I'm not sure I'm well informed enough to form that kind of strong opinion, but okay. It can be concluded that reaction of international community depends partly on how to say, political leverage, political gain, or some sort of PR, because there can be also seen a huge difference within only, if we talk about war in former Yugoslavia, the way the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia were treated, and for example, the war in Kosovo was treated, after which we were actually bombed by NATO. So NATO had a humanitarian intervention after things that occurred in Kosovo, mass atrocities that happened in Kosovo back in 1999. And there is a big difference between, for example, 1999 in Kosovo and 95 or 94 or 92 in Bosnia. So it can be based on those kind of facts. It can be actually concluded that the international community chooses whether or not to intervene somewhere, and that they have their own calculation on whether or not that is good or bad. And that is a very big difference on what is happening on the ground in many, as you already mentioned, in many other places in the world currently.
Okay, I wanted to add another voice to this conversation. We're now Demir Mahmutcehajic. Demir, I hope I said your name there correctly. Human rights campaigner, researcher, activist, and politician from Bosnia and Herzegovina, joining us now from Stockholm. Demir, thanks for your time. What are your thoughts, Demir, about this case, about how it's played out, and then about the divisions about how people have reacted to this life imprisonment for Karadzic? There are still those who say that this has been injustice, that he got an unfair trial, etc.
What happened yesterday, I think it's just too late. It's irrelevant anymore. It's just too late. It's too little, too late. He's an old guy. It's not going to have any implications on the ground. It's not going to heal. It's not going to bring justice. It's not going to bring satisfaction. It's inconclusive. This is not a trial. This is a politics. And we are left in our quagmire for God knows how long. There are three different sides of a story. We are further apart from each other, and nobody learned anything from 90s.
Demir, I wonder, you said that this is too little, too late, and this is ineffective to an extent. But you know, Demir, of course, that there were a lot of people, of course, who went to The Hague to witness the verdict being read out, and they cheered, of course, those, of course, who were from the victims' family members. For them, this is important, Demir, isn't it?
But it is important. It is important, like finding the bones of your slaughtered relative 20 years later on, so that you can have some kind of conclusion. You know, it is important in such a way that it brings emotional, I would say, like instantaneous reaction. Oh, he's got what, he's got some kind of justice. So on that individual level, it is important to those directly hurt victims, mothers, fathers, brothers, relatives, But it's too late for society. It's too late for a healing process. It's too late for facing up to the responsibilities from all sides. It's inconclusive in a way that nobody's really satisfied.
Okay, Demir, I'm going to cut in because I know Nidzara wants to say something. Nidzara, wanted to react?
It's hard to react. It's I don't believe it's very late for this. It's what is important now that we should forget now about Karadzic himself, like a person, and we should read the verdict. We should all read the facts that are established. They're already established by this verdict and many others. And we should learn from this verdict and all other verdicts, not only us in Bosnia, not only them in Serbia. Also read it. People in the Western countries should read it and learn something, because in the past, obviously, we learned nothing.
But Nidzara, if I may cut in for a moment, Nidzara, I wanted to push you on a point there, because you said that the verdict lays out the facts. But as you well know, Nidzara, there are Karadzic supporters who would say those are not the facts. How do you respond to that, Nidzara?
Well, you will always have something like that. But this is the court, this is the international court, and this is the only thing we have. There is nothing else. I also have serious doubts about the ICTY and some of the decisions they made, the way how they worked, the reasons why they existed at all. But that is the only thing we have. And we have to find a way to kind of like convince ourselves and everybody that this is important, and to read. They can. I don't mind if somebody say, okay, this is not true or this is, but you have to read what is written there. The problem with many people is they have no idea what these verdicts and what established facts are saying. And that is what I'm saying. Let us read, and then we can maybe talk about, is this right or not? But first we have to see what is established, what is there. And the ICTY did not help us in even now, as you know, I'm not sure that your audience know that, all the verdicts and the official language of the ICTY is English and French. So basically a mother from Srebrenica, if she doesn't speak English, she's not able, even at this moment, to read the verdict of Radovan Karadzic. That's shame. That's a really big issue.
Very good point there, Nidzara. Jovana, I wanted to bring you and get your thoughts on what Demir and Nidzara have there said, and I wanted to go to both the points of Nidzara and Demir. But Demir, they're striking a pessimistic tone, Jovana, about divisions within society and of the effect that this entire issue had on society in that region. What do you make of those divisions going forward?
Well, whenever someone said that there are divisions, he or she is completely right, no doubt. What I wanted to point out is that it feels like sometimes we are mixing different pillars of transitional justice. So transitional justice is a whole process of one society coming from one conflict to democratic, let's call it, society. There is no... people always say reconciliation. There is no official point in time when you say, okay, we are now reconciled. But there is all the time something that you can do to make your societies more closer. When we talk about Karadzic verdict, unfortunately, that is only one pillar to transitional justice. That is criminal justice. But you have a lot of other, for example, reparations that can be, I don't know, money reparations to the victims, but it can be also non-material reparations, such as official apology or official recognition of those victims. So those are all other things that we can work on now when we have the legal basis. When it comes to the ICTY, unfortunately, I have to say, and I have to agree with other guests, there's been a lot of mistakes, but I also have to agree with other guests to say that is all we have. If we in the Balkans had the strength back in 90s or back in the beginning of 2000 to convict our own criminals by ourselves, then we wouldn't need an international tribunal whatsoever. But we didn't have the strength, and that never happened. Therefore, we had an international tribunal in The Hague that conducted those proceedings.
Okay, let me go to Nidzara then with the final comment. Nidzara, to you, do you think that the society can now come closer together after this?
I have to go back and to say we have to read the verdict and we have to put a lot of effort and we have to find our own way. That reconciliation is not something that can be imposed from the outside. Reconciliation is not something that is coming between societies. Reconciliation has to come between people. So I don't need any president to apologize to me. I want to find a way to talk with people in Serbia, to talk with other people in Bosnia who don't think in the same way like I do, who didn't survive what I did. We have to find a way to talk about what did happen in the past, and we have to find a way to involve people from the West to hear our voices and not to impose what they want us to think about. So I hope there is a hope. I hope there is a hope, I have to say. Yeah. And but we have to work hard. We have to work hard, really, really, really hard.
Very well. We appreciate, of course, all of your times and insight analysis. That was Ms. Nidzara Ahmetasevic, who was speaking to us from Athens in Greece. She's a journalist from Bosnia and Herzegovina. We were also joined earlier by Mr. Demir Mahmutcehajic, who is a human rights campaigner, researcher, activist, and politician from Bosnia and Herzegovina. He had been speaking to us on the line from Stockholm. And we were also joined by Ms. Jovana Prusina, who is a transitional justice program coordinator with the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network, known as BIRN, and she was speaking to us from Belgrade in Serbia. And now, viewers, as all of our guests are shed light on, this is an issue which has come quite late. It's come decades late, literally, for many victims' families. And it seems like it is justice at some level, but is not justice at others, where it seems the attention of the international community wasn't there when it should have really mattered in preventing A, this genocide from occurring, and B, in reacting immediately in its aftermath. So there's a lot of question marks remaining about how this will affect society going forward in that region with the major divisions that exist. As I put to one of our guests, there are a lot of Karadzic supporters. There are many who see him, in fact, as a hero, not as a war criminal, not as a murderer, not as someone who committed genocide and or supported genocide. We'll keep a close eye on those developments and see how all of that works going forward. But that's all for this edition of Scope. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.